Pere, 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 pere. Pere, 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 pere. Gotcha.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Crap Café. Today, we'll be exploring the leaders of the series' two largest opposing forces, the revolutionary Monkey D. Dragon and the Fleet Admiral Akainu, the Red Dog himself. And I'll be explaining everything from when and why Dragon decided to abandon the Marines for their lack of justice, to the truth behind Akainu's history with sword, and the true reason for his ideals of absolute justice. And by the end of the video, we'll have not only unearthed the true history between Dragon's past with Akainu, but it will also explain every interaction Akainu has ever had with the monkey family. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, buckle up your seatbelts and unbuckle your belt buckles, because I promise that this will not just be the greatest Dragon and Akainu theory you've ever heard, but it might just be the most delicious One Piece theory to ever exist. So let's jump right into why I believe that Dragon and Akainu are former sworn brothers and the first disciples of the legendary Marine, Monkey D. Garp. As heads of both the world's largest rebellion force and the world government's navy, Akainu and Dragon have long been juxtaposed as the leaders of the world's two largest opposing forces. And ever since the Battle of Marineford, we've known that the two of them must share some sort of history together, as Oda made it abundantly clear that Akainu held some sort of grudge against Dragon that extended even to his alleged sons, Luffy and Ace. And over the course of the arc, Akainu somehow managed to turn the phrase Dragon's son into a derogatory slur. But at the time of the Marineford arc, it was impossible to know the context of this beef, and there was no way to tell if Akainu hated Dragon simply because of his notoriety as the most dangerous man in the world, or if it was a situation akin to Don Chinjiao. And maybe Akainu was defeated by Dragon, and has since held a lifelong, generational grudge against the monkey family. But I believe that this cold case was finally reopened with the official confirmation that Dragon is a former member of the Marines. And ever since chapter 1097 in Egghead, I've been on a mission to try and pinpoint exactly what the cause of this tension may be. Because now that we know that a young Dragon would have likely been in the Marines at the same time as the rookie Akainu, it means that wherever this grudge stems from is almost certainly due to their connection at the time. And it wasn't too long after this first reveal that I believe Oda dropped his next huge clue. Because during the second to last chapter of Egghead, we got a very interesting scene that I believe pertains directly to their hidden past. As in chapter 1124, titled Best Friends, there is a very peculiar scene between Akainu and Kizaru, in which Akainu attempts to grill his subordinate about the chaos that erupted on Egghead, but is interrupted when Kizaru decides to crash out a little, and asks Akainu if he's ever had to kill his best friend, and that if he has time to doubt his efforts, that he should come to Egghead and see for himself. Now, normally, Akainu is the type of person who would happily melt a man's bones for even a minor offense. So after hearing such flagrant insubordination from his underling, I was expecting Akainu to erupt to a whole new level. But instead, we got something that we've never seen from him before. An apology. And he says, "I'm sorry, brother." Now, outside of this being a sign of remarkable progress between Akainu and his presumably court-ordered therapist, to me, this response served as both an apology and an answer to Kizaru's question. As with the reveal that Stella was Kizaru's best friend, this now marks the second time in the series that one of the OG admirals was tasked with killing one of their closest friends. As back during the Buster Call in Ohara, Aokiji was also forced to freeze his friend, Jaguar D. Saul, and leave him for dead on the burning island. So with two of our three OG admirals being duty-bound to kill their best friends, what about our final OG admiral? The only one who was able to successfully rise to the rank of Fleet Admiral. Has Akainu ever been asked to kill his best friend? Has he ever had a friend? And if so, what happened? Well, looking back to his conversation with Kizaru, I think his out-of-character response may actually be enough to answer part of our question. Because I believe that the reason Akainu felt the need to check himself and apologize is because he has in fact been asked to kill his best friend once before. And while Kizaru was reminiscing about Vegapunk, Akainu was probably thinking about his own traumas. And after he apologizes, he specifically says the word brother, as if to show his solidarity with Kizaru. And this is where I believe his history with Dragon all begins to tie in. And I believe that Oda may have even been alluding to this hidden backstory the entire time. Because while I've been saying Akainu so far throughout this video, that's not actually his real name. And it's simply an epithet he gained during his time with the Marines. And in Japanese, Akainu translates to red dog, both a fitting nickname and marks him as one of the potentially 12 Marine zodiacs, named after animals in the Chinese zodiac, alongside Kizaru, the yellow monkey, Fujitora, the purple tiger, and the remaining members of the Marine zodiac. And while Akainu is incredibly fitting for his aggressively obedient character, his true name, Sakazuki, not only allows us to perfectly connect the dots for this theory, but will also allow us to perfectly understand Dragon and Akainu's past, present, and future going forwards in the series. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Japanese, or if you're like me and your college Japanese skills are a little rusty, you may not be aware of the true meaning of Akainu's real name, Sakazuki. And this is a question I actually found myself asking a few months back. So I'll have to give a shout out to my fellow One Piece creator, Kusaland, for providing me with some of the inspiration behind this theory. Because, not to brag, but I'm one of the few One Piece creators that's lucky enough to be a part of this Sakazuki Brotherhood. And when I was scrolling through his channel page and first noticed this, my immediate reaction was to try and figure out what on earth I might have done to Kuso to make him think that I would just naturally be a Sakazuki fan. But after a little bit of Googling, I was quickly reminded that Sakazuki is not just a name, but a practice in Japan. And as a One Piece fan, it's actually something we're all already quite acquainted with. As Sakazuki is a term that refers to the ceremonial process of forming a bond over the exchange of sake cups. And this is the same ceremony that Luffy, Sabo, and Ace all performed as children, that would forever bond them together as brothers for the rest of their lives. But despite the deep and sentimental meaning of Sakazuki, it's always been more than a little odd that Oda would choose this specific name for arguably one of his least kind and brotherly characters in the series. But perhaps that disparity is exactly why Oda knew that it would be the perfect choice. Because what if his unsuitable name was always meant to be a clue from Oda regarding the circumstances behind his history with Dragon? And there's a strong possibility that during their time as young cadets in the Marines, Dragon and Sakazuki performed the Sakazuki ritual, becoming lifelong sworn brothers. And while some of you might think I'm crazy, just let me cook. Because I believe that this one idea allows us to solve everything from when Akainu developed his philosophy of absolute justice, why he despises Dragon and the monkey family, and the true reason behind the mysterious sword tattoo on his arm. So let's start from the bottom and work our way up. Now, if you're an anime only, this next part of the video will almost certainly be news to you. Because looking all the way back to the tail end of the Marineford arc, we were given a peculiar cover story featuring Sakazuki that seemed completely inconsequential at the time, but gained a whole new level of meaning several hundred chapters down the line. As all the way back in chapter 592, we were shown a fun scene of Akainu trying his best to groom a bonsai tree in the image of his absolute justice, only for it to go about as poorly as it might sound. But what slipped past everyone at the time was the strange sword-shaped tattoo on his right arm. Because at the time of release, this detail didn't mean anything at all, and wouldn't become relevant again until several hundred chapters later. Because once we learned of the organization called Sword that exists within the Marines, his tattoo took on a whole new meaning. Because according to Aokiji, Sword is made up of Marines who have forsaken their official roles in order to gain the freedom to act freely against pirates and even ignore orders that they disagree with, but at the cost of being abandoned and disavowed by the Navy should they ever get captured or killed. And as a whole, they are effectively a force for good, fighting to bring down and monitor the worst pirates on the seas. And once this was revealed, fans began to flock back to Akainu's cover story, and it became clear that Oda, at least at the time, was attempting to tie him to the Sword organization. However, Akainu is currently the antithesis of everything that Sword stands for, dutifully serving the world government with his iron fist of absolute justice. And not only does he not seem to be aware of Imu's existence, but he himself has been responsible for multiple tragedies. So even with a literal sword tattoo on his arm, we all had a hard time believing that he was secretly on the good guy's side. But now, with some additional context, I think that Akainu's sword tattoo may have been Oda's way of hinting at this theory from all the way back during Marineford, and tying him directly to Dragon and the Monkey family. Because while it's still yet to be officially confirmed, I believe that Monkey D. Garp was the founder and supreme commander of Sword before his retirement. Now, this is something that many of us had already assumed, well before he led Sword into battle in Egghead. But oddly enough, we still weren't given an official Oda box confirming his title. And if you're confused and assume that X-Drake must be the leader of Sword due to his title of captain, think again, because based on the title and ranking system of the Marines, the head of Sword should actually be its supreme commander. Just as Kong is the supreme commander of the Navy, Figureland Garling was the supreme commander of the God's Knights, and Monkey D. Dragon is the supreme commander of the Revolutionary Army. Thus, there is almost certainly a supreme commander of Sword who has yet to be named. But I actually have a whole Sword theory planned for an upcoming video, so I won't go into further detail here. But I think it's been pretty widely accepted by the community that Garp was at one point in charge of Sword, and thus their original supreme commander. And this idea would perfectly explain his decision to never rise past the rank of Vice Admiral. As he states, this allows him to keep from under the Celestial Dragon's thumb, and would allow for him to operate Sword in relative peace. So with Garp potentially already being the leader of Sword at the time Dragon was in the Marines, this could perfectly explain why Akainu has a sword tattoo. Because if Sakazuki was truly the sworn brother of Dragon during his short stint in the Marines, I believe that this likely implies that Dragon and Sakazuki were the very first disciples of the legendary Marine, Monkey D. Garp. And I believe that Oda may have been setting up this connection ever since Garp's introduction, as throughout his time in the story, Garp has always served as a mentor figure. From both Kobe and Helmeppo taking them under his wing and training them into formidable Marines, as well as Luffy and his brothers, by sneaking by whenever he could, and putting them through various forms of questionable training methods, but all with the goal of molding them into proud, strong Marines. In fact, it's always been abundantly clear that Garp's efforts with Ace and Luffy were all an attempt to rectify his past mistakes with Dragon, attempting to raise a Marine who could fill his role and carry on his own ideals of justice, with him finally succeeding in raising a set of proper Marines with the recruitment of Kobe and Helmeppo, who presumably followed in his footsteps, becoming members of Sword. And just recently during his battle against Blackbeard's crew during the Egghead arc, it was revealed that Kuzan trained under Garp, and was his most recent disciple before he recruited Kobe and Helmeppo. But while he was an excellent Marine, and even received the nomination to become Fleet Admiral from Sengoku, it was actually his rival, Sakazuki, who stepped in and managed to claim the promotion via a duel to the death with his co-worker. So what if Dragon and Kuzan weren't Garp's only failed disciples? Perhaps Akainu was also another pupil turned sour. Not only would this redefine the context between Akainu's duel with Aokiji and add a whole new layer of tension, but it also does the same to one of Garp's most infamous scenes from the Marineford War. And it even explains some of the similarities between their designs. Because I think we can all recall the scene just after Akainu fists Ace, and Garp, in a fit of rage, storms after him, only to be stopped by Sengoku, where he threatens that if Sengoku lets him up, he's going to kill that damned Sakazuki. Now, at the time, him using his government name didn't really mean all that much, but in the context of this theory, in the recent Kuzan reveal, the usage of Sakazuki gains a whole new context, as it implies a much more personal connection to Akainu than simply using his alias, and also evokes a potential brotherly connection he may have once had to his son, as he watches his former student hunt down his family members in the name of his foolish absolute justice. Additionally, this could also explain some of the odd characteristics that they share, such as Akainu's dog epithet and hound-based attacks bearing a remarkably similar appearance to Garp's dog hat and figurehead. And Akainu, like Garp, primarily uses punches in combat, and even has an attack that rains literal lava fists down from the sky, very fitting of a student of Garp the Fist. But if Sakazuki truly started out as a student of Garp, what could be the reason that he turned to the monkey family? And when and why did he begin following his path of absolute justice? Well, I think that both of these questions can be answered by some of the recent reveals that just came out during the Elbap arc. Because in our latest chapter, as of writing this video, we're getting our first glimpse of a young cadet Monkey D. Dragon, and at none other than God Valley. And I believe that this reveal is the final piece of the puzzle we've been waiting for, because this finally gives us a perfect through line that explains every lingering mystery about the duo. And shockingly, I think I managed to solve exactly what happened between Dragon and Akainu during the events of God Valley. Now, I've actually been theorizing that Dragon would be a part of the God Valley incident for some time now, so his reveal in the latest chapter is actually causing me to do some rewrites to this theory, since I no longer have to explain why I expected him to be there. But since I already spent the time on the research, I will briefly go over some of the reasons I compiled that led me to believe that he would have played a role. Firstly, not just every important figure in recent history, but also just about every important figure within the Revolutionary Army was in attendance at God Valley, as this is where Kuma first met Ginny and Ivankov. So it made sense to me that Dragon, who I personally have always believed to have been a former Marine, would have also likely been involved in the God Valley incident, especially since his father and likely mentor has long been confirmed to have played an important role in the events. And looking back to his reasoning for leaving the Marines, the World Noble's human hunt certainly seems like the type of radicalizing event that would convince a young Dragon that there was no justice to be found in the Navy, and convince him to do his utmost to overthrow the world government's rule going forward. But now that we're literally in the middle of the God Valley flashback, as of the time of writing this, and Dragon has officially been spotted on the island, I think we finally know enough to understand the full history between Dragon and his former brother, Sakazuki, as well as the events surrounding Dragon's escape from God Valley. So let's begin by going back to our unanswered question in the first part of this video. Because if Akainu, like Aokiji and Kizaru, was once asked to kill his best friend, as we predicted, then based on what we've unearthed so far, that friend was more than likely his Sakazuki brother, Monkey D. Dragon. And no spoilers, but based on Dragon's current actions in God Valley, I think we finally know why Akainu was given the order. Because with Dragon now attempting to flee with such precious cargo, he single-handedly injected himself into the center of the events surrounding God Valley. And the fate of the story is dependent on his ability to safely find a way off of the island, putting him in a remarkably similar position as Jaguar D. Sol and Vegapunk, who were both killed while attempting to flee. So to me, this would imply that God Valley is likely the event that tore a rift between Sakazuki, Dragon, and the monkey family. Because what if Dragon wasn't the only famous cadet at the scene of this atrocity? And what if his sworn brother, Sakazuki, was also in attendance? In the same way that you can almost always expect to find Kobe and Helmeppo on similar missions. And extrapolating even further, I believe that God Valley might just be the location that Dragon and Akainu first gained their incredibly powerful Logia Devil Fruits, and quite possibly the event in which Akainu, the Red Dog himself, earned his epithet. Now, it's long been established that many of the prizes set up by the World Nobles for the human hunt consisted of several powerful Devil Fruits, as well as the Jewel of Hachinosu. And so far, it's been established that this is where the Pawpaw and Kaido's Azure Dragon mythical fish fruit were obtained. But it also seems like this could be the location where Big Mom got some of the fruits for her children, and could possibly even be where Ivankov got his powerful hormone fruit. But even with those included, there's still several mystery prizes in the now 9 mystery chests that have been confirmed. So what if 2 of these mystery chests also held Akainu's Magu Magu no Mi, and Dragon's yet-to-be-named Wind/Storm ability? Not only do I believe this fits in perfectly with the established timeline of events of God Valley, but I think it also gives us our final clue to breaking down the full conflict between Akainu and Dragon. Because while the name Sakazuki holds a secret connotation in regard to this theory, I think Sakazuki's nickname, Akainu, also holds some additional info. as his moniker of Red Dog must have been given to him after he received the Magu Magu no Mi and displayed some sort of dog-like obedience or loyalty to the world government. So what if the way he earned this fruit and gained his epithet was by doing his best to follow the order to kill his sworn brother? You see, if Sakazuki was first given the world government side of events on Dragon's actions at God Valley, they may have been able to appeal to his strong sense of justice, tricking him into turning on Dragon and turning him into an obedient dog and tool for the world government to use to their whim. And now, looking back to his incredibly out-of-character conversation with Kizaru, I think there's one last detail that we can use to explain why Akainu failed in his mission to kill Dragon and developed his ideology of absolute justice. Because when considering that Dragon is alive and well in comparison to many of Akainu's other opponents, it means that he was not only able to escape him without relative harm, but he was also able to escape the island of God Valley before it got completely eviscerated. So how is it that Dragon managed to escape a conflict with Akainu as well as one of the most chaotic events in all of One Piece history, without so much as a scar on his body? Well, unlike Kizaru and Aokiji, at the time of God Valley, Akainu was a much younger and much less experienced marine. So while the other two, veteran vice admirals, were able to suppress their emotions and execute their duties as marines, I think the much younger, pre-absolute justice version of Akainu would have had a much tougher time following orders. And if in a moment of weakness, Akainu held back from ending the lives of Dragon and his precious cargo, it could perfectly explain his apology to Kizaru, as well as his transition into following his absolute justice and his lifelong grudge against the monkey family. As Akainu failing to kill Dragon would go on to have much larger repercussions than if Kizaru or Aokiji failed to kill their targets, as Monkey D. Dragon would go on to become the most dangerous man in the world, and is in charge of the world's largest rebellion force, attempting to upend the very system Akainu has dedicated his life to protect. And as a true believer of the Marines and world government, Akainu could easily have fallen for the government's outright lies and propaganda regarding Dragon's true motives and ambitions. So every accomplishment the Revolutionary Army would eventually achieve would be a result of Akainu's failures from that day, only adding to his guilt and growing his resentment. This could be why by the time of the Ohara incident, just a few short years after God Valley, Akainu had already adopted his ideology of absolute justice and decided to blow up the research ship full of innocent citizens that was evacuating the island, as he now knows the repercussions of what can happen if even a single person gets away. This could even add some incredible context to his actions during the Marineford War, and it truly feels like this is something that Oda has had in motion ever since his reveal. Because ever since our first introduction to Akainu's cruelty, we've seen many parallels to this theory playing out. As when we first met Akainu through the lens of Kobe and Helmeppo, Garp's newest disciples, we watched on in horror as Akainu completely eviscerated a defecting soldier who was attempting to flee the battle and return home to his wife and children, just as he originally failed to kill the defecting dragon. This scene was then followed by his dragon son slander throughout the arc, his Sakazuki moment with Garp, and finally by his iconic interaction with Kobe at the end of the battle, where he throws himself in front of Akainu's bloodthirsty absolute justice and pleads with him to end the war and save the lives of the countless injured Marines and pirates alike. And in this moment, I believe that the reason Akainu chose to attack Kobe was because he could see the image of a young Monkey D. Dragon standing in front of him, as Dragon had once given him a similar decree back on God Valley. And when Akainu dismisses Kobe's pleas and attempts to kill Garp's chosen protege, who else would come to his aid but a piece of that precious cargo that Dragon once fought so desperately to protect? But let me know in the comments, what do you think? Do you believe Akainu and Dragon are former sworn brothers? Has the upcoming battle with the Revolutionary Army in Marijua gained any additional weight for you? Personally, if Oda chooses to go this route during the God Valley flashback, this could be the perfect resolution to Akainu's plotline, as ever since Marineford, many fans have assumed that Luffy will need to defeat him at some point in order to avenge Ace's death. But what if it's not Luffy and Akainu, but Akainu and Dragon who have been set on a collision course this entire time. Then, their upcoming battle could be the perfect conclusion to their storylines. But once again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, or I at least kept you entertained while you ate your food, please do me a favor and leave a like on the video. And if you want to see some more of my theories and keep an eye out for the channel, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to join the crew. I've still got a lot of fun theories planned and they just keep coming, so expect another 5-star meal real soon. But if you're starving and just can't wait, then I suggest you check out my latest video solving the mystery behind Elbaf's mysterious heavenly realm, and why I believe that it will not only be our access point for the community's long-awaited trip to the moon, but thanks to the help of the mural and recently revealed pole star, it might just hold the key to finding the location of the infamous Lodestar Island. Or if you would prefer to learn more secrets about some of the series' biggest antagonists, then check out my video on Blackbeard, where I get to the bottom of everything from the secrets of his devil fruit powers, unusual body, and the true reason behind why he doesn't sleep, which has only continued to hold up amongst these recent Zebek reveals. And finally, if you made it all the way here to the very end of the video, please leave a comment that you've finished off your plate, and I'll make sure to give each and every one of you a personal thank you in the comments below. So until next time, thank you for coming to the Crap Cafe.
Gotcha.